Welcome to another episode of Clean Talk. I'm your host, Brad Whitchurch. We are coming to you live from beautiful downtown Orlando, Florida, in the Clean Talk studios. Very excited to have our special guest with us today. Mark Erba is the Senior Director of Global Market Development for International Well Building Institute. Mark, welcome to Clean Talk.
Thanks, Brad. Great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you on the show. Mark, maybe you can tell us a little bit more about yourself and why you're on Clean Talk today.
Yeah, so as Brad said, I am Senior Director of Global Market Development for International Well Building Institute, IWBI. My job essentially is to raise awareness regarding the implementation of design, operational, and policy measures that could be incorporated into organizations to increase the health and safety capabilities of their buildings for the people that are in those buildings. You know, one thing we always like to share is that 90% of our time is spent in the built environment, and that's what we're focused on. We're focused on the well-being benefits of people when they are in those built environments. So yeah, so that's kind of in a nutshell what I do and what we do, but we'll get into more of that, I'm sure.
Well, I certainly hope so. That's our goal here. And obviously, in these COVID times, what could be more important than making sure that our environment is safe, that the places we go out into the public are safe to be in, and certainly in our work environments. This is not just about COVID, though, right? So you guys have been doing this long before COVID, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the WELL program?
Yeah, actually, it was actually launched in 2014, so well ahead of COVID. Although there were strategies that were implemented then that would have also directly impacted airborne pathogens. So yeah, in 2014 it was launched, and prior to that there was about 10 years of research that went into the well building standard, as it's referred to, that to assemble different practitioners, medical practitioners, public health professionals, corporate real estate professionals, facilities management, to build the standard based on science-backed research, peer-reviewed research, to implement health and safety strategies into the built environment. So there's a 10-year period where it was all about the research to come up with what different strategies, what different features can we put into buildings to make them more healthier to the benefit of the people in them, whether it be employees, consumers, or people who are going to watch a baseball game.
Well, I want to dig more into those initiatives and the WELL certification, as well as the safety rating. But let's take a step back. Tell me a little bit more about your background and what drives your passion in this area.
Yeah, you know, I could really, when I think about that, I could think of a specific incident that really clicked a light switch for me. I've been in my background professionally has been in the commercial interiors industry, in business development, and primarily textiles, mostly commercial flooring. And at the time, I had just moved back up from Atlanta to the Northeast to New York, and I was working for a relatively small organization that was in a mid-rise, eighth floor of a mid-rise building. Obviously, I'm not going to mention any names here, but I was on a business trip on the West Coast, and I got a call from the owner of the company, who I reported to, who said, "I want you back here in New York tomorrow morning because we've got a major hotel brand coming in," and he knew I had contacts with that major hotel brand. He wanted to be there to do the presentation. So I had to make my apologies to several folks on the West Coast who I was meeting with, including our representation there. And I booked the next red eye back. So I got on the red eye flight with the intention of going right back to the office, or right to the office in New York, which I did. Had my change of clothes there, as I usually did. So I walk in pretty much before anybody was there. It was around 6 o'clock in the morning. And as I'm walking into the elevator, a gentleman is walking out with a spray bottle and a rag, and we kind of crossed each other. And I get into the elevator, and the doors closed, and I immediately started gagging, and my eyes started watering. He was in there cleaning the elevator, as he did every morning, unbeknownst to me, to that extent, but with it must have been a very highly concentrated ammonia product, because I have a relatively strong disposition, but it kind of knocked me out. I came out of the elevator on the 8th floor, got changed. I was still gagging and coughing, and my eyes were red and watering. I'm sure the red eye had a lot to do with that as well.
It's
Uh,
never a good idea, right? You always think the red eye's a great idea. It never works out well, but I'm sorry, go ahead.
it never works. You're absolutely. It never works out well, particularly when you need to be productive on the other end, immediately productive. And you're
And
spending a
then
lot
when you're walking into a caustic enclosed environment like the elevator, right?
Exactly, exactly. So, yeah, and the long and short of that story is that I started feeling sorry for myself because the presentation went horribly, and I was not on my game. Of course, I was not at my best from a well-being standpoint, and therefore from a productivity standpoint. But at the end of the day, my employer really suffered the most because there was a missed opportunity from a business standpoint. The meeting did not go well. There was a financial cost to that because it got me on a red eye last minute. The cost of a luncheon, all these things that go into meeting with your and spreading the word of your product was all mitigated because of the inability to really give a top-notch performance. As I thought further about it, though, what really sunk in was, okay, here I am. And by the way, I didn't stay with that company very long after that. So there was a retention, or lack of retention component based on that scenario. But the guy that was in the elevator with that toxic, highly concentrated substance, he does that every day. He
Every day.
goes in, he does that every day. He goes home to his family every night. And he really did not have the same choices that I had to make a change. And that's really who we think about, who's thinking about these people, who's thinking about their health and well-being. We feel as though that's a social responsibility.
Absolutely. I agree. Appreciate that story and that your dedication towards the well being of our society. What has changed as a result of COVID? You said you started in 2014. No one knew anything about COVID. We weren't talking about coronavirus and airborne pathogens like we are today. I've often said that if there is a silver lining in COVID, it is the development, it is the additional thinking and putting things under that lens to improve the way we operate as a society for better health and well-being. Did you have that kind of experience at Well? What changed with COVID and how were you able to take that negative and turn it into a positive?
Got it. Well, I'll answer that first as far as what changed for me from a professional standpoint. I had always had, after that kind of light went on with that story that I just told, I went to and in the space I was in with commercial interiors, environmental sustainability was always a very big factor. I mean, the textile industry had historically been abusive from an environmental standpoint, so they really took kind of a leading role on turning that ship to be less environmentally abusive and focused on environmental sustainability. So out of that came, you may be familiar with LEED certification. That's
Sure.
been around a lot longer. I think maybe 15 years at that point. I was at the United States Green Building Council conference called Green Build, which is the organization that facilitates LEED certification. And it was in 2014 in New Orleans, and that's when the well building standard was launched at that specific conference. Different organizations, but both very mission driven on the built environment. So the well building standard was launched in 2014, and it was manifested in well building certification. And well building certification is kind of the most comprehensive certification that we facilitate. It crosses 10 different categories of concepts. There are over 100 features or strategies for implementation of design interventions, operational interventions, and policy interventions, all focused on health and well-being in the built environment. What changed is when in March of 2020, when I was in New York, I think for the last time on March 11th, my partner and I, we came home and she couldn't smell the kitty litter So there, and we didn't know anything about the, the
In
smell.
March, they didn't know that was a symptom yet, right?
We
That's
did
that was
not.
early on, right?
Exactly, but she did have a fever and so on and so forth. But we presumed that she had it. But what International Well Building Institute was doing at that time, and I wasn't with the organization at that point, but in April of 2020, IWBI convened a group of approximately 600 different professionals, public health, medical professionals, facilities management, global real estate, to specifically brainstorm on what we could take out of the well building standard and maybe what we didn't already have in the well building standard, and focus on a very specific platform to implement strategies to mitigate the spread of COVID-19 and other airborne pathogens and infections. So that was a huge shift for us. We're completely focused on this kind of single building certification, very broadly comprehensive across 10 categories, including, thermal comfort, nourishment, mental health. I mean, and we'll go into those when we talk about the well certification. But the well health safety rating came really was launched out of COVID. And it focuses on 5 different categories: cleaning and sanitization, air and water quality management, health services, emergency preparedness, and stakeholder engagement and communication, all focused on mitigating the spread of airborne pathogens within the built environment.
Very interesting. I have a ton of questions, but I assume that are there different certifications for new builds? Are people that are doing new builds engaging with you to set the standards for the strategy of construction? And then are there different certifications or qualifications, I should say, for existing buildings? How do you address those kind of scenarios?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. First of all, the well certification, I should say, the most comprehensive, has a certification for core and shell buildings. So really getting into the guts of the building, things like reflective glass to mitigate glare, HVAC systems for air quality and water quality systems. So there's the core and shell, and then there's also the most widespread application of the well certification is for interior spaces, because that's where the most impact could be made to implement different design strategies, if you will.
Well, I know that you don't endorse specific technologies, but we've got a lot of infection preventionists who watch our show. Can you give us an indication of some of the types of things that you would recommend to help really achieve that well certification that are benefiting, as you said, the airborne pathogen side of the issue?
Yeah, so I mean, the air category is probably the one that comes most to mind because it's an airborne pathogen. But for example, enhanced air filtration with UV light filtration, HEPA filtration. Some of these, and this, as your audience knows, this category has just exploded over the past 2 years of newer technologies that could address some of these issues. So that's been very robust, but also policies. I mean, mental health policy around rejuvenation, or around mental health for parental leave, if or sick leave, that kind of are standards that organizations could follow to all aimed at enhancing the health and well-being of their employees or consumers, for that matter.
Interesting. I would love to dive into that. Coincidentally, I have been working on the Seal Shield maternity plan today. So I'm fascinated in this aspect of it. So it's not all about materials and construction and technology. There's also the mental health side. You mentioned maternity. Can you give us some other examples of some best practices that you're encouraging with your clientele in that area?
Yeah, and again, I have a tendency to repeat myself on this because I think it's an important point that all of the strategies are based on science. All the strategies are based on research, peer-reviewed back science. And they all lead back to the body systems and how those strategies impact for the better different, different body systems. So, but to directly to your question, for example, both from a design component and from a policy component, having quiet spaces, which is a design component in the work environment, where people could go and basically get some whether it's getting some rest or just a mindful moment. If it's a new mother, I forgot the terminology, but all you mothers out there know what I'm talking about. Essentially, a place to to go and have some private space as a new mother. All these different components from a design standpoint, but also from a policy standpoint, to provide your employees with the latitude and the safe space to be able to take a 20-minute break during the middle of the day, accessibility to various ways in which they can get some exercise or movement during the day. Sit-stand desks is another one. If you're sitting at your desk all day, you've heard the phrase "sitting is the new smoking," but one very concrete fact about that is when you're standing, you're burning 50 calories an hour more than when you're sitting. So just that visual, or that illustration of the difference between just sitting all day and being more active. So combined, the design interventions and the policy interventions are really combined to be able to, otherwise they're not effective. I mean, if you say, yeah, you could stand up, but you can't leave your desk for, for 3 hours at a time or whatever, then there's a conflict there. So
Well,
it's more comprehensive.
I feel uncomfortable sitting down right now. I feel like I should stand up, but I think I'll be off camera. So we'll just have to hold off a little bit on that.
I'll illustrate my sit stand up.
There you go. Oh, I like that. That's nice. Look at that. That's like hydraulic. Very nice.
Exactly.
Good, good. So it extends beyond just the construction elements and the design elements. It's getting into policy, which I guess includes benefits and some of the latitude that are given to employees to help increase their wellness, well-being. Any other tips in that area that you think every company should be implementing? Is there something simple we can do today to be better in that regard?
Well, maybe this isn't for every company, but I'll tell you, I'll point out the red eye story. Basically, is it comes to is top of mind when you're working whatever it is, an 8 to 12 hour day, and then you take a red eye back and you're expected to be in the office first thing. That's not beneficial. Again, it's not beneficial to the employee. It's not beneficial to the organization. So having parameters around how long of a day is somebody working. If you're working 10 hours straight, is it in your best interest as an organization to really put some structure around how many hours in a day your employees are working, and give them the latitude and the feel and the safe space to be able to say, I've been on it for 11 hours today. My next 12 hours are not, I'm done, I'm off. Because that is not just it's not just to the benefit of the individual. It's to the long-term benefit of the organization as far for a sustainable organization.
Well, I could commiserate on the red eye story all day. I feel like that's one of those things you have to learn the hard way, but it never works out. It always seems like a good idea. It never works out. What else can you tell us about? We talked about policies within the organization to help improve employee wellness. What about regulatory issues? Is there any kind of piece of the regulatory process involved here? Are you helping companies be compliant with regulatory issues, or is this outside of the regulatory process?
It's outside of the regulatory process. We're not a regulating body. We're basing all of these implementations on science and research, not on policy. Although it has impacted policy. Some of the measures relative to improving our schools, for example, have been taken from a document that we contributed to on the health and safety of schools in the 21st century. And it's actually had some impact on policy as far as proposed policy to implement different strategies and upgrade our schools. If I'm remembering the numbers correctly, we've been running about an $85 billion deficit every year on improving our schools. And that's kind of hard to catch up from. But, we always, I can't think of in my lifetime, and it's my lifetime is spanned. I'm not saying I'm 80 years old here, but I have lived just by the skin of my teeth in 8 different decades. And every election cycle, with the risk of getting into politics here, I'll just say, I don't care who it is, has always said education is a priority in our country, and yet we have let our schools suffer and degrade over time to the detriment of our children, and our children are our future, as we all know. So I think that's something that everybody has a stake in, and we don't get into policy or regulation, but I would suggest that the science behind what we do has impacted policy.
Well, education, certainly low hanging fruit. Agree with you on the importance of having schools with best practices. Certainly in our consumer spaces, right? We've all starting to go back out in the world, going to the movies and restaurants. But what about the workplace? We've seen a major shift since COVID of a lot of work from home or split work time. Is the Well program, are some of your clients interested in trying to reverse that trend to create a safer environment in the office space, or do you think they're not related?
Oh no, they're certainly, yeah, they're very much related. When we talk to the various stakeholders, and we're usually talking with global real estate, facilities, human resources, and now ESG professionals, which we could talk about a little bit because I think it is an important point that is motivating organizations to do the right thing, do its best for their employees and their customers, at the same time with an eye on the value of their company and their bottom line.
Well, so I'm just wondering about the office space. People
Yes,
are
for sure.
wanting to work from home, and part of that is that maybe you want to be at home. Maybe you're more productive at home, but maybe you're not. But
Yeah.
some people genuinely don't want to go back to the office for a lot of these reasons we're talking about, right?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. There's still a hesitancy. There's still a uncertainty, if you will, that the reality is many people are still concerned about when it comes to health and safety back in the workplace. But you also take into account mental health, and when you take into account mental health, there's also a lot of research around the fact that when we are isolated, our mental health suffers. So going back to the workplace is actually a positive move to mitigate mental health challenges for individuals. So yeah, but generally there still is a reluctance to go back to the workplace. Not everybody has that choice, and not everybody wants to either work at home or work fully at home or work fully in the workplace. What we're seeing is a hybrid model. It seems to be emerging most decisively, if you will, where applicable, employees, depending on their job function, can spend a certain amount of time and prefer to spend a certain amount of time in the office and a certain amount of time working from home. And many companies are equipping their employees with ways to work productively at home. Whether it's technology, sit, stand desks, or whatever it might be.
Well, that's certainly been our philosophy, and it does come back to the mental health issue. I mean, from my standpoint, we want our people to be happy, healthy, and productive. And why do I care where that happens as long as we're achieving those goals? And like many companies, we've recently gone to kind of a split shift where sometime in the office, sometime remote. And so far, it's working out pretty well. I think this is a clear trend in our society right now. But what about healthcare? So we are an infection control podcast. Most of our audience are healthcare related. Are there different standards for healthcare facilities, and how much is well doing to make our acute care facilities safer today?
Well, I would suggest, without being an expert in that particular field, I would suggest that the healthcare facilities are probably well on the way to have already implemented many of the strategies that are incorporated in the well building standard. The certification really crosses all sectors, including healthcare. As far as features within the standard that are specific to healthcare, it's very minimal relative to HR policy and promoting health benefits, offering on-demand health services, sick leave. There's a component in there about supporting community health. So, organizations that have, facilities where they could actually bring in vaccination stations where applicable for their employees. These aren't things that they have to do, but these are various strategies that they can implement to really. They're looking to raise the health and safety in their environment. There's no utopia, as we all know, but all of these, to the best of their ability, to raise that standard in their buildings for the benefit of their people, and the employees and consumers are responding to that.
Well, I do want to get a little bit of clarification between the well certification and the well safety rating. But what is the feedback loop? So if you get well certified, do you do audits to make sure that things are progressing along the right track, or how do you get feedback on is this actually effective at increasing health and wellness and well-being for people in society?
So a good question. Everything that's in the well building standard, there is research history behind it. So there's already kind of a database of research. That being said, we are very intent on increasing the database of case studies with organizations that have implemented well features and well strategies. The process is very interactive. We have support teams internally that work with the different stakeholders at the organizations to identify, okay, pretty much everybody now has a smoking ban policy, right? For example, eat low-hanging fruit, but nevertheless, not everybody has a smoke ban in the workplace, and it's not something that's mandated. But it's obviously very important relative to the health and safety of both the individual smoking and the people who are not smoking. There are different features that your organization likely already has incorporated into your facility, and which would give you credit towards earning that certification.
So once you go through the certification process, then is the next step getting the safety rating, or are these independent initiatives?
So they can be independent. We talk a lot about the well journey, if you will, for organizations. I mean, we work with small businesses with one building to about 20%. Currently, about 20% of the Fortune 500 organizations have implemented well strategies and are their buildings are either well certified or well health safety rated. So it really spans a broad spectrum. Just to throw out a couple of other examples that are outside of the corporate realm, in your home state, the Florida Marlins Stadium and the Raptors Arena are both health safety rated. If you walk into a JP Morgan Chase or a Citibank branch, or a TD Bank for a lot of our friends here in the Northeast and in Canada, you'll see the health safety rating seal on their branches. So again, a broad spectrum of facilities, not just focused on the corporate environment and not just focused on employees in the space.
I feel obligated to tell you, Mark, that here in Florida, we don't consider the Tampa Arena to be the Raptors Arena. I just want to make that clear. But
Okay.
but the point is well taken. Um, Before we go, any predictions for the future?
Well, I mean, I think you touched on this earlier that health and well-being is not new because of COVID, but it's certainly being focused on because of COVID. So, yeah, we are seeing health and safety as an increased focal point. I mentioned ESG a couple of times, environmental social governance. Maybe a more familiar term is corporate social responsibility, but the ESG framework is essentially, it really is rooted in the investment community and has an impact on the value of companies, because companies that are not mitigating risk in their workplace, and that could be environmental risk, whether it's climate change and doing things to minimize their carbon footprint on the environmental side, but on the S side, the social side, implementing strategies to mitigate the risk of their organization. Companies spend up to 90% of their revenue on their people. I mean, that 10 times what they spend on rent, and up to 100 times what they spend on energy for those buildings. So when you think about that, your biggest investment is in your people, and yet many organizations don't sustain that investment by doing things that will take care of the people, considering how much time they're spending in their buildings to perform their duties. So relative to, when I say the future, this has already started, but we see it as an increasingly focused on platform that companies are leaning on to exhibit that they are doing these sustainable risk mitigating strategies for their organizations, which the investment community looks at as a value enhancing, strategy or framework. So,
Fantastic.
yeah.
Well, the company is International Well Building Institute. Mark Erba is our guest. Mark, if people want to find out more about the well certification or the well safety rating, what should they do?
Well, if you you could Google IWBI. It's a lot easier than International Well Building Institute. So IWBI, our website is wellcertified.com. We may be making a change to that, but regardless, it'll be seamless. Just go to IWBI, Google that. There's a lot of information. You could look at the research through our research digests. You could see all the different organizations that are member organizations, many organizations that are service providers in the cleaning and sanitization space. Other member organizations are architectural and design firms, real estate management firms, manufacturers of technology, property technologies. About almost 300 different organizations are member organizations of IWBI, and most of them are walking the walk and implementing the strategies and going for the certifications that kind of show that they're implementing those strategies in their space and in their workplace.
Fantastic. So for more information, Google IWBI and or you can call us at 87 Seal Shield. That's 877-325-7443. If you've enjoyed our episode, check out our archival episodes on YouTube or at cleantalk.tv, and be sure to register to be a part of our community. Until next time, for my guest Mark Erba, I'm Brad Whitchurch, reminding you to keep it clean.